Hi, my name is Jan Oliver Schwarz, and I'm going to talk about a paper I've written and published. I will take you through this paper in terms of talking about where the initial idea came from, what we actually did in this paper, and also what the findings were that we did here. This is a paper that was published not too long ago in the journal Futures and Foresight Sciences, a new journal. I think actually that was the second issue in 2020, called Corporate Foresight as a Microfoundation of Dynamic Capabilities. And I didn't author that myself. I had two co-authors. One is a long-standing collaborator I've worked with, is René Robeck, who is now at the EDEC Business School in France. And also together with Bernhard Wach, who is at the Bielefeld University of Applied Sciences in Germany. I am currently a professor of strategic foresight at the Technical University of Ingolstadt in Germany. So the initial idea, and this comes from my background of working for a long time in the field of foresight or corporate foresight, was to think about and explore how the field of foresight can be actually connected or be connected to the field of strategic management. And of course, there are in a way many obvious overlaps you would have. And the most interesting for me was a lot of times to look at theory of dynamic capabilities within strategic management. And what you can see here is that it's been argued that dynamic capabilities of a firm is about sensing, seizing, and transforming an organization. And if you look at the process of corporate foresight, if you come from the perspective of René Robeck here, the perceiving, perspective, and probing, you kind of see there are some obvious similarities. And the initial idea, therefore, was to actually explore that in more detail and to see how does corporate foresight fit into the theory of dynamic capabilities, which has been, since the seminal article of David Tees, been also perceived as one of the most relevant developments or theoretical developments within strategic management. We'll be looking at all of this in the following minutes in more detail. So the aim of the study really was, and this is here the research question, is to which extent are dynamic capabilities built through organizational processes and routines, and to which extent do they rely on the skills and education of leaders. So what this, for the one thing is trying to look at two levels within an organization, so the organizational level, but also the individual level. And to address that question, we conceptualize these two dimensions by using corporate foresight scales, meaning that for one, corporate foresight encompasses skills of leaders and the practice of organizations to sense, make decisions under uncertainty, and drive adaptive processes. But second, to which extent do these factors drive dynamic capabilities in terms of organizational success to develop new products and services, new strategies, and shifting of resources? So that's kind of the broad aim we came from within this study. Let me clarify here a few basic terminologies that are of relevance in this research before we come to the three hypotheses we tested. So this is a definition going back to Robeck et al. From 2015. So corporate foresight permits an organization to lay the foundation of future competitive advantage. And here we already see, of course, the close linkage here to strategic management and strategy. Corporate foresight is about identifying, observing, and interpreting factors that induce change, determining possible organization-specific implications, and triggering appropriate organizational responses. So this is also where the question comes in of how do organizations actually transform itself to react to what they have sensed in terms of changes in their business environment. Corporate foresight involves multiple stakeholders and creates value through providing access to critical resources ahead of competition, preparing the organization for change, and permitting the organization to steer proactively towards a desired future. So this, of course, is also a theoretical perspective on corporate foresight, which is more than just scanning for weak signals and trends and then developing scenarios to understand how the future could look like, but also more thinking about what does that actually mean for the organization? How can the organization then change and transform itself? Now, as I just mentioned, the dynamic capability perspective has been since 1997 conceptualized by Thies and colleagues in the SMJ, been very influential in arguing that dynamic capabilities are means by which an organization has the ability to renew and recreate its strategic capabilities to meet the needs of changing business environments. And of course, here's that linkage between corporate foresight and dynamic capabilities with this focus on what is happening in the organizational environment. The dynamic capability lens explains why some firms are adept at anticipating and exploiting opportunities enabled by advances in technology and rapid changes in their market space, while others struggled or go out of business. And what one needs to mention that here in the late 90s, here the focus was on technology, while corporate foresight, for instance, would have a broader perspective on the changes in the business environment. And so dynamic capabilities are the firm's ability to integrate, build, and reconfigure internal and external competences to address rapidly changing environments. Here, of course, you can see the close relationship between dynamic capabilities and corporate foresight. In more detail, this means that generic dynamic capabilities is about sensing capabilities, meaning constantly scanning and exploring new opportunities across markets and technologies. And that can be done, for instance, in research and development or market research. Seizing capabilities, so addressing these identified opportunities through new products, processes, or activities whatsoever. And reconfiguring capabilities or transforming capabilities, meaning that new products and processes may require renewal and reconfiguration of capabilities and investments in new technologies. That, of course, means at the end, and this is something that nowadays, of course, many companies are experiencing, to change and transform their organizations. So what we did is not only take a perspective on kind of the organizational level in terms of dynamic capability, so what does the organization need to do, but also taking here in perspective on the individual level. And here, this framework by Day and Schumacher from 2016 was very influential for us, where they argued for leadership capabilities in relationship to the capabilities, so these three generic capabilities within the dynamic capability framework. Arguing here that sensing is about peripheral vision. And this is, of course, something Paul Schumacher has been working on quite a bit, on the capacity or the capability of a leader to identify weak signals of change. Also including learning here, but also within seizing about probing and learning, flexible investment, transforming, organizational redesign, and external shaping. So with all of that, we came actually to our research hypothesis. Now, the one was arguing that corporate foresight practices on the organizational level have a positive relationship to dynamic capabilities outcomes on the organizational level. So the hypothesis was, so if there is an organization that is good at doing corporate foresight, that should have a positive impact or effect on the outcomes of dynamic capabilities on the organizational level. Then, of course, we argue as hypothesis number two, that corporate foresight training on an individual level, so training leaders and managers, should have a positive effect on dynamic capability outcomes on the organizational level. And thirdly, that the relationship between the practice on the organizational level, corporate foresight training on an individual level, and dynamic capabilities outcomes on an organizational level are fully mediated by the dynamic managerial capabilities on an individual level. So seeing that connect of those two levels that we looked at and the dynamic capability outcomes. To investigate this, we did the following. We conducted a quantitative survey. We chose here the so-called Dow Jones Sustainability World Index, with the rationale of arguing that companies that are selected here for that sustainability index should not only have a focus on ecological and societal aspect, but also on an economic one in terms of being sustainable, having a sustainable competitive advantage. We took the index of 2016, which had 370 companies in there. We addressed managers within the strategy department, also with the argument that we should see these kind of activities around foresight within these departments. We collected the data between the end of 2016 until the summer of 2017. And from these 317 companies, actually received 66 questionnaires back, which is a response rate of 21%, which is fair. Questions were asked on a 7-point Likert scale, and what you see here on the slide as well is that the composition of the sample in terms of industries represented, but also where the company came from. So we're looking here about at a cross-industry and also a global sample, of course, with somewhat of a focus on Europe. Let me describe the outcomes. So first of all, the findings demonstrate that the organizational practices and the corporate foresight training of managers have significant positive impact on the dynamic capabilities on the firm level. So supporting hypothesis 1 and 2 here, what we can show in our data. The second finding is that dynamic managerial capabilities are fully moderated the relationship between the other two factors and dynamic capabilities. And that this means that the empowerment and willingness or the motivation of managers to drive sensing, seizing, and transforming is the key that unlocks the development of dynamic capabilities on the organizational level. And this actually led us to our argument of the paper, and that's also why we gave it that title. The corporate foresight can very well be understood as a microfoundation of dynamic capabilities. So if we try to bring that together here at the end, it kind of, besides the broader argument that corporate foresight can be understood as a microfoundation of dynamic capabilities, which also nicely allows to link the field of strategic foresight to that of strategic management. That one key finding was that training leaders in sensing change, so paying attention to weak signals or developing peripheral vision, making decisions under uncertainty and plan to reconfigure strategic resources is key. But also that building organizational practices, so establishing processes and so forth for continuous scanning the environment, anticipating change and probing into new markets is also essential. But also that this is maybe something that one would need to look at, that regularly assessing the dynamic managerial capabilities of leaders in an organization is something that organizations should be looking for. Thank you.